Hi, Representative Brian Ashe. Welcome to another episode of What with Rep Ashe. That's well, how about that? We talk to different guests about different things going around the Western Mass or around our region. Tonight's episode, the third of 2021, another one on Zoom. We're going to talk a little, it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about some things that are important to people in this area, like the crumbling foundations and what that means to folks around here. Then we're going to get into a couple other topics, maybe about the budget, and we're going to talk a little bit about redistricting. But first, I want to welcome and thank my first guest, a friend and colleague, Senator Ann Goby. Ann, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Representative Ashe. This is great, Brian. I appreciate you inviting me on, and I think it's a great, what you're doing, having the show. I think it's a good opportunity to share with folks what's happening. And so I give you a lot of credit for doing this. I might have to steal your idea.
Please do, please do. And you know what, and honestly, I started this before COVID, but during COVID, it's actually worked out well because you're still able to get messages out to people and still be able to have the show like we're doing via Zoom.
Absolutely.
I did one in person. Everything else has been via Zoom since then. But before we get going, Ann, why don't you tell to the people that might not know you,
Sure.
how long you've been in office, kind of how you got there, and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, believe it or not, I'm in my 20th year in the legislature. It's amazing how quickly time goes.
I know.
I was elected to the House in 2001. It was a special election. And I live in Spencer. My rep district at the time was 11 towns. My Senate district, I came into the Senate election in 2014, sworn in 2015, and of course our good friend Senator Steve Brewer, it was his Senate district that he served for many, many years before that. And so when he retired, I took the plunge and gave up my House seat to run for the Senate seat, and I was fortunate enough to be in the position I am now. So I have 28 towns in my Senate district, from the New Hampshire border to the Connecticut border, everything. Like I said, I live in Spencer, which is one of the more eastern towns in the district, and I go where I share Munson with you, and to my western border towns of Ware and Palmer, Munson, and so it's a beautiful area. It's about the same size as the state of Rhode Island. So if you're going to take the state of Rhode Island and superimpose it, that's basically the size of my district. So I haven't minded not making these trips to Boston. I do have to say, Brian, it's
saved a lot of miles on the car, right?
Saved a ton of mileage on the car. And, and the other part, though, you realize how much time is wasted when you're in the car, driving from place to place. And so the productivity level has definitely gone up this past year, which is good.
And you're right. And we talked a little bit about this before we started, that because of all the things we've had to adapt, that some of this will probably be incorporated into our lives, because parts of this are more efficient, especially for the type of work we do. Because, I mean, your district, you have to travel so far. If you could be on at something via Zoom because you have another event you have to drive to, definitely.
Well, I mean, even the show, Brian, I know that you said that, you typically would be doing things in person, right. And, it just works out so much easier sometimes. Being able to do Zoom and doing it in the comfort of your home is kind of nice.
Absolutely right, and you don't have to worry about schedules or traffic or if people can make it.
I just have to worry for my husband to come parading through or the dog to stop barking. But those I can deal with.
Same thing here. Not my husband, but my dog. Yeah. My wife might get afraid too. But right. Again, thank you, and we're going to talk about a couple of things tonight, but we'll get into crumbling foundations, and we will describe a little bit about it and the history. And just so people know, Senator Goby and myself, over a year ago, were named as co-chairs of the Crumbling Foundation Commission, which was for us to pretty much collect facts and data and turn it over to the governor with recommendations. Why don't you maybe you can start from your initial experience and how we got here, and then we'll talk a little bit about the steps.
Yeah, and I know a lot of your audience, because of the good work that you've done, Ryan, in the area, I'm probably very much in tune of what's going on with that. Just real briefly, several years ago, I received a call from a Connecticut legislator saying, hey, we've got this issue in Connecticut. And it was right after I was elected to the Senate. He said, you just took over the Senate seat. you're in towns that are, and I had never even heard of the issue.
Same
And,
here.
to get a call like that and I'm like, whoa.
Right.
It
You
almost,
don't get calls from other state legislators.
right. So, I mean, obviously I took it seriously because of that. And then
Right.
when he started to talk about the breadth of the problem, and I was like, oh my gosh. And, fortunately, when I reached out to you, you already knew about some of the issue. And of course, then we had some of our folks that live in our towns that reached
Yeah.
out and unfortunately know the issue much better than we do because
Yeah.
it's affecting their own homes. And, and from that, like you said, we formed the commission. We had hearings on it. And for people who may not know, I mean, just very briefly, it's caused by a mineral pyrrhotite that's in the aggregate that's
Right.
used to pour foundations. And unfortunately, what some people may or may not know, and one thing that we learned from doing the commission and talking with our state geologist, Stephen Mabey, who's over at UMass, there's a whole vein of this pyrrhotite that goes all through Massachusetts and actually through the New England states. And unfortunately, it was used in concrete, and we know the situation that happened in Connecticut. And right now, we're taking a look because I'm starting to get calls from other places in Central Mass that we had not realized. And now we're concerned that maybe there were some other quarries in Massachusetts that may have been getting their aggregate and unfortunately, unknowingly, picking up this mineral too.
And just for the people that don't understand it, so the reason the Connecticut legislators called the senator and called myself is because they were probably about 3 years or so ahead of us.
Yes.
With these instances where it was a quarry in Connecticut, and I think it was from 1983 to 2015, I believe, that foundations poured within this time period from this quarry in Connecticut had the potential to have the pyrrhotite. Do I say that right? I always say it wrong. But you know what I mean. But anyway, yes. And if it's in your concrete, it doesn't mean your foundation will necessarily fall apart. However, if it does get damp, that's what gets the whole thing going. So people could have foundations laid for 10 years, for 20 years, and then something happens, and soon as it gets moisture in there, that interacts with pyrrhotite, and then it expands, and the concrete cracks, and then thus the crumbling foundation. So it's been a big problem. And as the senator mentioned, when we first found out about it, I understood it, but I didn't understand the gravity of the situation and how damaging and how detrimental it can be to somebody's foundation. And as the senator mentioned, we both have residents in our districts that have suffered through this. And thank God, for our sake and for everybody else's sake, they stepped forward and were part of our committee, a couple of them, and helped kind of show, hey, this is what happened to us. But I mean, if you need a whole new foundation, it can cost a couple $100,000. And that's the tough part about this.
Yeah, that is absolutely the tough part. And of course, last Tuesday, Brian, you and I, we were glad to have Congressman Neal join us to tour a couple homes in Wales, which is one of the communities I represented. And just as you said, Brian, we had, one of the homeowners that was there that we hadn't anticipated to go to their house, but we did.
Right.
And they came forward, and they originally weren't going to come forward. And then speaking with the wife, she said, look at, we don't have anything to lose by not coming forward at this point.
Absolutely, right.
And it ended up being obviously the pictures are there.
Well, here, Senator, I have some of these too. I'll show some of them.
Yeah.
And hopefully you can see this on there just to see what some of the stuff looks like. These are, now this, I believe this basement was done in the mid 90s too. So correct. It's not that old. You can see the giant cracks through there. I mean, they're all over the place. And this, as you mentioned, Senator, the house we went to, I think that's the ceiling up here.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, if I didn't know, I would have thought the foundation was 100 years old, because the damage and the erosion was really incredible and scary to know
very
that.
Scary. Yeah, I mean, the wall was actually bowing. It
right.
was, not good. And like you mentioned, I mean, the only real cure for it, unfortunately, is that you have to get rid of the old foundation somehow. And
right.
It typically means lifting the house off the foundation, getting rid of that old foundation, pouring a new foundation. Now, I know that there are different companies trying experimental, different ways to do it, but
Right.
basically that's what has to happen. You have to get rid of that. And one of the big issues, you know, I know that I've had people say to us, well, you know, with the commission, because we realize we need to try to do something to help these homeowners out.
Right.
In Connecticut, they tacked on an extra fee to everybody's homeowners insurance. And
Right.
people say, well, wait a minute, you know, my house is fine. I just
Right.
have
Why
my
should
house
I
built.
pay for
Why
it?
should I be paying for the guy down the street or the woman, you know, 3 towns over? But one of the things that we saw, I mean, if these people can't afford to fix their homes, and unfortunately
Right.
insurance doesn't cover it,
Right.
and if they walk away, well, guess what? Those property values affect everybody, everyone. And so it does affect us. And, you know, and I kind of look at it just like we had talked last week, like when the tornado went through. The state stepped up and the federal government stepped up and the local government stepped up to help people because, and I look at this in the same way. This wasn't something
Absolutely unforeseen act of
absolutely
God.
unforeseen. Yeah. So right now, so we do have what you and I were able to get in the budget the last couple of years to help with at least testing, to get some reimbursement for testing for people, and then we.
Why don't we talk a little bit about that? What people would do. So we kind of talked about what what the Fire-T is, how it got into potentially people's homes, and I think it was like about a 50-mile radius. So we're talking Western Mass, parts of Central Mass.
Correct.
But if people aren't sure if they have it, some of the steps they can take is one, you can just visually look, but some people have their basement sheetrocked or done over. But you have to get an engineer is recommended to get to either do a visual test or a core test. Maybe you talk a little bit about,
because unfortunately, you know, we can't give the names. We can't tell people who to go to for the vision, but there are good engineers out there that have the experience. And we have done the testing through our Department of Professional Licensure, where they are the ones that have the application online, that people can get the application to be reimbursed. And one is just a visual, to have an engineer come in and literally do a visual look at things. And like those pictures that you brought up, and I guess people would say, well, why do I need an engineer to tell me when you see that? You know,
but
there are normal
cracks that some foundations just have over time too.
Right, and these, of course, these aren't the regular. You know, typically when your house is settling, you may have, you know, one vertical kind of.
Right.
But this is the spider web kind of things. They say it looks, you know, like the skin of an alligator. You know,
right.
Or actually, my skin's kind of dry right now. It looks like my skin right now.
And it's progressive. That's the other thing too. It doesn't just get to a point and stop. It keeps progressing.
Just keeps going and going. And so we have people can be reimbursed up to 100% for up to $400 for the visual. And then if that engineer says, oh, I definitely think you have it, the next step is to have 2 core samples done. And we will also reimburse up to 75% of the core samples out of pocket expense of $5,000. So we do have something at least in place, because you know you need to know if you've got the issue or not, and
absolutely,
really, you know, and it's not to push the panic button. We're not trying to scare people.
No, not at all.
It's not that, but we've seen what's happened in Connecticut in the thousands and thousands of homes, and we could be looking at 1,500 to 2,000 homes here in Massachusetts.
Right.
So
and I believe it's our responsibility to protect the buyers. So if somebody's coming in to buy a new home, just as you have to tell them if there's a an oil tank buried and you have to take care of it. This is going to be one of those responsibilities where people should know that. You shouldn't buy a home and then find out, oh, you just bought a lemon. And that's part of the things that we work on. And again, thankful to the legislators in Connecticut for not only informing us, but they've also come up to a couple of our forums and a couple of our hearings just to share their experiences so we can learn from them the steps they took and the mistakes they also made. We're also lucky, you mentioned earlier, like our state geologists and UMass. We've really been able to, fine tune it, and I think they're getting better and better of figuring out what's in what's in each foundation, how you can find it. The difficult part still is that there's no easy fix to it, and there's no easy fix to get your foundation taken care of. So you mentioned before, homeowners insurance doesn't cover this. It's just one of those things that everybody has homeowners and it'll cover a lot of things on your foundation, but this is not one of them. So one of the things that Connecticut did was set up a captive insurance. So maybe we could talk about that. And we haven't got that far yet, but we've talked about it.
Well, we've talked about it, and we have that in the bill that we have just filed, you know, to bring up that, to explore that issue, as well as testing of quarries that we have in Massachusetts, and some of these other protections that we can try to offer to people. I want to say a special thanks too, because as you know, Brian, the realtors have been really helpful to us.
Glad you brought that up. Absolutely.
Yeah, and especially the folks in Western Mass have already been very proactive.
Yes.
And making sure that you know, letting people know that this is an issue, and they are signing some of these kind of blanket disclosures that it may or may not have parasite in the foundation.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I had that on there to work with the realtors. I think I'd met with one group before everything kind of got shut down, and I was really happy to see that they wanted to be a part of it. They wanted to be upfront with it because obviously this is potentially hurts sales for them, and it could slow things down. But in the long run, I think their reputation as well as ours, you want to be honest and you want to be upfront about this. And some of this stuff will be around for years and years. So it's our job, yours and mine, in the legislature to educate people that have something like this, and also to file legislation, like you mentioned, that we put through, whether it's money for testing, and then down the road, hopefully we get to a point where we know how many homes are impacted and how much it might cost. And that's been kind of the issue, getting people to come forward, which we understand that some people are a little hesitant, but I think it's in their best interest as well as everybody else to come forward as quick as possible, because you'd like to know if you have it. You don't want as you mentioned, Ann, the house we were in, I was nervous about it, maybe not collapsing right then, but I wouldn't want to be staying in there all the time. It's definitely getting worse and worse.
Right. So, we still have a ways to go on it, but, I'm glad that we started working on it when we did. I'm glad that you've been such a great partner, and, the other partners we have, and we've got a long way left to go, so.
We really do, and my guess is we'll probably do an update like this down the road, as we are a couple years behind Connecticut. But again, we want to just get the information out there, let people know if you've heard about this, but you're not really sure. Just check when your foundation was poured. If you can walk around your basement and it's visible, take a look at it. And if you see something that's concerning, call somebody. Call an engineer, or call your town. A lot of towns have the information on like I know East Long Meadow, they have information at their town hall that you can call, and that's some of the other things that people are doing, filing for abatements, and that's something. It's different right now because every town's going to make their own decisions, but as we move further down the road, hopefully we can get everybody on the same page moving forward, so people don't literally lose their home or lose all the value of their home and have nothing, or go bankrupt and have to turn their home over to the bank, which that would be obviously bad for them, and it's bad for everybody. Right. So as we move along, but Ian, thank you so much, too, because you've really taken the lead on a lot of this stuff, and I appreciate the work you do, and I know the residents, in your district really are grateful for everything you've done, taking this so seriously. And easy, it hasn't impacted my house that I know of. I don't think yours, but it's not about that. It's about making sure your neighbors are safe, making sure people in our district are safe. So thank you very much for that. We don't have to go into too much more about that. We will follow up, and hopefully if you're watching, people, you can contact us, via email or call our offices if you have questions about this. And we'll, as time goes on, there'll be things in the newspaper, or we'll do something else like this to keep people updated when we move further down the line. I thought it would be so much fun now. One of the other things that's going on, every 10 years, we do this. Well, we don't do it, but the federal government does the census. And I know some people don't understand exactly what it does or why they do it, or it's a pain. This year, it obviously got pushed out a little bit. But the census impacts your job. It impacts my job, congressional seats, as well as funding. Now, I believe you serve on the redistricting committee.
I do, yes. I'm the vice chair on the Senate side, And as you know, Brian, the Senate will do the Senate, will draw the Senate districts, the
Right.
House will draw the House districts, and then we work together on the congressional districts.
And for people who don't know, when the senator talks about a Senate district and a rep district, a state representative district has approximately 40,000 residents. And I think it's like a 2.5% fluctuation where if you go too high, you have to lose something. You go too low, you have to gain something. And a senatorial district has approximately 160,000 residents. And again, with a plus or minus when we do the census. And the reason it's those numbers, it's strictly divided by the population in the Commonwealth for the amount of senators and the amount of reps we have. So every 10 years, some districts, like the Berkshires, I think went down 10 years ago. Some areas go up. So some districts shrink, some districts grow. So Ann, how do you go about deciding, hey, how do we move this around?
Yeah, so it starts out, pretty basic, looking at what the numbers are in every individual community, looking at what the population is. And as you mentioned, Brian, I mean, we know that there's more population east in Massachusetts. Right. So I'm expecting that there's going to be some slight shifts in most districts because, as you stop moving, you can only move, and like those of us who are kind of in the middle of the state, we typically, our district tends to move every 10 years. So I was on the redistricting committee 10 years ago when I was in the House, and my district changed, and I'm fully expecting, because of the population shifts, that we're going to change again. And it's not, the population of Massachusetts has grown overall,
right,
but it hasn't grown consistently in every part of the state.
Right. Yeah. And over the years, people have been redistricted right out of their seat.
Yeah, well,
it doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Yeah, it would have happened, and the big part is that is with the congressional representation. So the last time around 10 years ago, we would have lost, because even though it's kind of it's a very different formula too for the congressional, because even if your state has gained population, if you haven't gained it as much as maybe another state, it's still possible for you to lose a representative. And that's what happened to us 10 years ago. We were going to lose a congressional seat, even though the population of Massachusetts had gone up. It had not gone up compared to some other states who had gone up much more.
Yeah.
And in that particular case, it would have been one of the eastern congressional seats that would have been lost.
Right.
With Congressman Over deciding not to run for re-election, that kind of took care of the issue in some ways, because then we had just the 13 or so, and then we were able to shift around the districts. But of course, Congressman Neal and Congressman McGovern have very large congressional districts. Again, population, yes, it's the same as the folks in the Boston area, but of course, the 160 communities or whatever they have. I mean, that's a lot.
Well, just like a lot of our colleagues, I know a lot of colleagues in the House, they might have one community and that's their entire district. Where I have 4, which is nothing compared to a lot of people. I know, you go up in the Berkshires or your senatorial district, we just have less population. I mean, it's more spread out.
Correct.
So we have a lot of territory to cover, and I know it makes it difficult when they're doing redistricting, because you try to be fair for everybody. You want the districts to, they have to flow. They have to be contiguous. In other words, your towns all have to touch each other.
Right, and we have to get away from, the term what they call the gerrymandering, in these kind of snaky sort of districts, and to try to make things, as you mentioned, and that there should be some reason to it. So I know that the last time that we did redistricting, we did our best to say, let's say, keep people within counties, to keep regional school districts together, under one rep or one senator or a couple senators, and that kind of thing, not to try to split those, but it's not always really easy to do that. So what will happen is that there will be a series of hearings. There'll be one hearing that every member of Congress will be kind of the host far, if you will. And so the last time around, because we were able to travel, we did 14 separate hearings across the state. So we will be doing the same thing this time around, but most of them will most likely be by Zoom. The first hearing is slated for May 5th. May 4th is a Tuesday in Congresswoman Clark's district, even though we will do it by Zoom. And it gives an opportunity for people to weigh in, because we also have to make sure that you're not splitting lines to disenfranchise voters or to disenfranchise particular portions of the population. Yep. So you have to be, there's a lot more to it. I can say this, that one thing, we do this legislatively. Some states have an outside commission that does this, but the last time around 10 years ago, we were the only state not to be sued. So we did it right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we were. That was kind of a big claim to fame, because it's not unusual to have.
And that was all your work. That's why we didn't get
sued. Yeah, I would be right.
Yeah.
So we are going to follow some of the same guidelines, and we will do our best again in this time around. But the public is able to offer their comments on redistricting as well. If they, sometimes people will say, look at, we don't like that we're in a district with this and this town. They don't match us economically, socially. It's not the same. We think we should be here. So we do get testimony like that.
That's good to know.
Yes.
And now the census is done later this year. They pushed it out.
Yeah, we're not going to get it now until the end of September, and it was supposed to have been done the end of now. We've got the numbers.
Now, September when it comes out, and how long do you and the rest of the commission have to vote and submit the final
It needs to be done by November.
Okay. So by the end of this year, we will know what our districts are, congressional districts as well.
Right, because it has to be ready for when we start the election process next year.
Right. And why is it so important? Besides my district, your district, the congressional district, what other important? Why should people do the census? Why should I share how many?
Well, you mentioned about funding, because funding community development block grants. There's a lot of federal funding that follows people and where the people are in a district. And so if you are not counting correctly, or people don't step up to be counted, it's a real problem.
Right, you really hurt your own district,
you hurt
because
yourself.
You might be losing development, whether it's for streets, for new businesses, for development that's going on. So it really is important to have a good idea, not just so we know how many people for building all that, but for that reason alone, good enough reason. And then to get our districts so we're representing, properly, and everybody has districts that are fair and consistent for everyone.
Yes.
We appreciate your work on that as well. You're just on everything, aren't you, Senator?
No, well, a few things. But this will be interesting. I enjoyed the commission, the committee the last time that I was on it, and I did ask to be on the committee again this time around.
Oh, good. I'm sure the people in your district will be very happy as well. I thought now maybe we could talk a little bit about the budget. Okay. So we started our budget process, and for people that are watching, the way our budget works, just a quick example, is the governor submits his budget. A month or so later, the House does their budget. And then a month or so later, the Senate does their budget. And then they get a couple people from each of those groups, get together in a conference committee and try to get all three of those budgets into one budget, making compromise. So where are we at with that, if you don't mind talking a little bit about the budget?
Well, sure. And of course, last year was a very unusual year with COVID. Yeah. We typically try to have the budget done, the beginning of our fiscal year, July 1st. So we like to have a budget done by that time. This year, because there was so many unknowns, and had we finished the budget in July like we normally would have done, we would have had over a $5 billion deficit.
Right.
And so we waited. We waited this year. We did these what were called 1/12 budgets to
Right.
kind of get us through by month to month, to carry over to pay the bills that the Commonwealth has to do, and to take care of so many other things that the budget covers. And we did not finish it until the end of December. But by waiting, we ended up doing better with our revenues than expected,
Right.
some help, and so we did not have to make those really draconian cuts that we would have. So we are following back on the schedule that we should be. I know
Right.
your budget comes out.
In 2 weeks, our budget comes out next week, and then we start at the week of the 26th, I believe.
Okay.
And as Senator mentioned, so the governor's budget comes out first, and that's usually where everybody starts looking at that. Some groups panic, say, "Oh, we're not getting enough," or some groups are happy. But that's really just a template, because this is the governor's recommendation, but that's not by any means the final budget.
Right.
As I mentioned, then we will do our budget. It'll come out next week, and then we budget amendments as well. So myself, the senator, and all across the Commonwealth will request from our cities or towns that we represent, or agencies or groups that are looking to do something different, and we all submit our budget priorities. And obviously, they all can't be met, but they do a really good job trying to be fair and consistent, and try to make sure that they're taking care of the things that really need to be taken care of. And as you mentioned, Senator, when you go back a year or so, we really were in the unknown area, because our revenues and our economy had been doing great for quite a few years, and then we had COVID, and you mentioned a $5 billion deficit, and we really weren't sure what was going to happen. And we got reimbursed from the federal government. Things changed, and thank God our revenues have gone up as well. So we're much better positioned than we thought we would have been at this year, and we can kind of get back into, well, it's not completely a normal budget, because we're still doing it via phone calls and things like that. But this is kind of like the census. This is an important part for people to understand, because this is how we get our roads fixed, our schools, improved, or how an agency that it was important to certain people, how they get funding. It's through things like this. And if we don't know about it, if we don't know the needs of a certain group or agency, they might not get what they need. And that's why advocating and getting out there and letting people know what you do.
Right, and I think it was very helpful this last week when the Speaker and the Senate President and our Ways and Means and where the House and Senate were able to agree on what numbers would be for local aid. Because typically, that obviously is something that affects every single person. And if we're able to come out, we came out with an agreement. So that was extremely helpful. And it does a few things. Then it doesn't force us to fight for things and to say, oh boy, if we're going to fund this, are we going to have enough left for local aid in schools? So now it's basically taken that off the table, if you will. We already know what we're going to do for an investment. And I do think that that's very helpful. And it also shows how committed we are to making sure that the Student Opportunity Act is funded properly in the way that we said it would be, and to get back to where we were supposed to have been. So I think that that's all positive. And so we'll come out after you do your budget.
Yep.
Our budget, the Senate budget typically comes out about the second week or so in May, and then we typically will debate it just prior to Memorial Days when we do our budget.
Yeah. And I think I think what's crucial, or what helps often, is when the Senate President and the Speaker kind of are working in unison. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes they're at odds personally, sometimes professionally, or sometimes just different priorities. But it certainly helps when they're kind of in sync with each other, as you mentioned, because then it just makes the debates easier, or it makes the conference committee easier if we say, okay, we know Student Opportunity Act, we're on the same page with this, or something else that we're on the same page. Definitely makes it a lot easier. It makes the compromises that much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And and like you mentioned, Brian, we are getting some help from the federal government, which is going to be there this year. But but we still have to be careful, because that money is not going to be there. In some of it can be carried over till 2023, but
Right.
it's not going to be there forever, and we have to be very careful as we're planning our budgets that we're not relying on those funds to be sustainable, because it will not be.
You're right. And I think another important thing we're doing is we're not touching the rainy day fund.
Right.
Which it would be very easy. I mean, this would be the opportune time. We just, coming out of a pandemic, a lot of things have been hurt. We could dip into that or really use that to fund a lot of things. But again, you do that 2, 5 years, 10 years from now, if it's not replenished, then you could be in another jam. So I think we are doing a good job at it. I'm glad that we're keeping the rainy day fund there.
Yes.
Because we're preparing, knowing that, listen, we're not going to have, like you mentioned, the reoccurring fund. We're not going to have this. So we have to make sure that we're in a good, stable position for not only next year and the year after, but 5 years and 10 years out.
Right. So it'll be an interesting budget season, but I think, we are in a little better place than we expected. It's not going to be like, and I do expect that we'll have the budget done on time and on the governor's desk by July 1st.
I think so. And besides last year, which obviously was extraordinary circumstances.
Absolutely.
Every year, our budget is, and we get it in there, and we don't have any issues with it. So, any other things you want to talk about with the budget?
No, I think that's about it. People are very good about letting us know what their priorities are. I know that last week, like we visited with the libraries. They did their funding, and so we hear from a lot of advocacy groups, which is helpful.
Yeah, and just so people at home, a lot of times what will happen is, well, in times when we're not just doing Zoom, we'll get invited to a library legislative breakfast, or maybe for hospitals or for other groups, and they'll let us know their priorities and their asks if they have them, which they usually do. And then it's our priority or our job to decide who's filing what and what our priorities are with our own district as well as the Commonwealth. And that's why I think building the relationships is so important too. The longer you're in there, the better you know certain groups or agencies, or the better they know you. You kind of already know okay, we know these are going to be our priorities over here. And there's always new things that come up every year too, which,
there are.
It's fun, or it's great if you can help, a new business or a new agency trying to get off the ground, which is always good. And it's good for developing our communities as well.
Right, and as you just mentioned, I mean, we know how much our small businesses, especially, the hit that they took, and what we've tried to do, obviously through the unemployment insurance, and with some of the other programs that came out on both on the federal and state level, and what we can do now to try to help them going forward, and I think you'll see that reflected in this budget as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because we feel the pain that these small businesses. We understand how detrimental this, shutdown or lack of people being able to use your business, and we want to do everything. We know that our small businesses are the backbone of our communities and the Commonwealth, well, the country. And without them, the big businesses are great, but it's the small ones that fuel our day-to-day lives, and going through our towns, whether Spencer, Longmeadow, whatever other towns we're visiting. Right. Any other exciting topics you want to talk about?
Well, no, I did. I became eligible last Monday for my vaccine.
As did I.
And I had my shot today. So I have to say, it was, it made me feel really good to get that first shot.
Which shot did you get?
The Pfizer.
Pfizer.
And so it's good. My mom's 89 years old. She's had both her shots, but we haven't hugged, we haven't done any of those things. So 3 more weeks after I get my second one, I'll be able to hug her after a year. I mean, we've seen each other, but we've still been really careful,
You don't want to put her in harm's way. No. I certainly get that. I got my first shot yesterday. I had the Moderna, and it gives you a little peace of mind. And I know there's people that are anxious and have reasons for, but like anything else, the more information you get, the better off you are to make an informed decision.
Yeah, and thanks to all those health workers, like the woman who gave me the shot today. She talked, she was working at one of the ICU floors, and then she was working at the DCU center in Worcester that they use as kind of like an overflow area.
Yep.
And all she said to me, she said, "I'm enjoying what I'm doing today a lot more."
I'm
it's
sure.
been really hard for them.
It really has. And when you think, it's hard to believe over a year has passed.
Right.
And you think about, especially in the middle of all that, the horrendous work a lot of these healthcare workers had to go through, and the conditions, and just the things they had to see. Very difficult. Never mind that the whole time worrying about their own health and or a loved one at home, whether it's a mother, grandmother, aunt, uncle, husband, wife. So yeah, thank you to all of them. Obviously,
Absolutely.
we greatly appreciate the work. Whether it's our healthcare workers, our public safety workers. That can be a whole nother show, so don't steal
That could be another time.
But thanks for sharing about you getting this shot, as well as we're in a similar age bracket.
Yes,
we were eligible of that last week, and it seems like more shots have opened up recently, which is good. So hopefully, people that want to get the vaccine are able to get it, and as we get closer and closer and better weather, will be nice. Definitely, I already had a little peace of mind getting the first shot, so it is nice, and I'll be happy to get the second one. Yeah. Well, Senator, I can't thank you enough for taking the time, for traveling all the way out here to my basement, like Wayne and Garth.
Yeah.
Show our age there, right?
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Hopefully, we gave a better understanding to some people about crumbling foundations and what it is, or what they might need to do. And again, call your senator, your rep, if you have any questions, or just aren't sure if it's something that applies to you or what you need to do. And as well, thanks, Ann, talking about, whether the budget and our redistricting, all things that have an impact on the people you serve and the people that I serve throughout the county. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, this is must-see television right here.
All right, have a good night.
Thanks a lot, Ann.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.